The mountain came down like God's fist. One moment she was standing at the grave with frost clinging to her black dress, and the next the world was white and roaring and swallowing her whole. Snow filled her mouth when she tried to scream. The wooden cross marking her husband's resting place snapped like kindling, tumbling past her into the avalanche's hungry throat. She reached for him, but the mountain had other plans. Then came the rope. It wrapped around her wrist like a miracle she didn't deserve, burning through her glove as it pulled tight. She couldn't see who held the other end. Couldn't see anything but white chaos and the terrible certainty that she was about to die in the same cold that had taken everything else from her. But the rope didn't let go. It pulled. Hard. Desperate. Someone on the other side fighting the mountain for her life. The cowboy hauled her up through the snow with arms that burned and lungs that screamed for air. He'd been riding the high trail when he saw her, a dark figure alone on a slope, standing too close to the edge where the snow hung heavy and wrong. He'd spurred his horse forward, already knowing he was too late, already reaching for his rope when the mountain let loose its fury. Now he pulled her towards solid ground, his boots digging into frozen earth, his hands raw and bleeding inside his gloves. The avalanche roared behind them like a living thing that didn't want to let her go. He could feel it reaching for them both, could feel the ground trembling with its hunger. When she finally came free of the snow's grip, she came all at once, a woman in widow's black tumbling into his chest, so hard they both went down. He wrapped his arms around her without thinking, shielding her from the wind and cold that followed the avalanche like ghosts. Her whole body shook, not just from cold, from something deeper, something that had been breaking inside her long before the mountain tried to finish the job. She screamed a name into his chest. Once. Twice. A man's name he couldn't quite hear over the settling snow and his own rough breathing. Her fingers clutched something small and metal against her heart, holding it so tight her knuckles had gone white. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "I got you." But she didn't seem to hear him. She just kept shaking, kept holding that small object like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had turned to chaos and ice. The cowboy had seen grief before, had worn it himself like a second skin for longer than he cared to remember. He knew the weight of it, knew how it could pull a person under just as sure as any avalanche. This woman, this widow standing alone on a mountainside in the dead of winter, carried that weight in every line of her body. He got to his feet slowly, keeping one hand on her shoulder to steady her. His horse had bolted when the avalanche hit, but it hadn't gone far. He could see it 30 yards down the trail, ears pinned back, eyes rolling white with fear. The cowboy whistled low and waited. The horse knew him, trusted him. After a moment, it started back, picking its way carefully through the snow. The widow hadn't moved. She knelt in the snow where he'd left her, staring back at the slope that had tried to kill her. The grave was gone, buried under tons of white. Everything that had been there, the wooden cross, the small fence she'd built with her own hands, the flowers she'd brought up the mountain that morning, all of it erased like it had never existed. "He's gone," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it. The cowboy didn't ask who, didn't need to. The black dress told him everything. The way she held that locket told him more. "There's a cabin," he said instead. "Half-mile down the mountain. You need to get warm." She looked up at him, then really looked at him, and something in her eyes made his chest go tight. They were blue as winter sky, empty as the spaces between stars. The kind of empty that comes from losing everything and not knowing how to fill the hole it leaves behind. "Why did you save me?" she asked. The question hit him harder than it should have. He'd saved people before, pulled drowning men from rivers, carried wounded soldiers off battlefields back when he was young enough to believe wars had meaning. But something about the way she asked it, like she genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would bother, made him realize she'd been hoping the mountain would finish what grief had started. "Because you were dying," he said simply. She almost smiled. "Almost. I've been dying for 3 years." The cowboy's horse reached them, and he took the reins with hands that had started to shake now that the danger had passed. Shock probably. Or maybe just the weight of standing on a mountain with a woman who wanted to be a ghost. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded slowly, but when she tried to stand her legs gave out. The cowboy caught her before she fell, lifting her with an ease that surprised them both. She weighed nothing. Like the grief had hollowed her out from the inside. He set her on his horse and climbed up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. She didn't protest, didn't speak, just clutched that locket and stared at the buried grave until the trail curved and took it from sight. They rode down the mountain in silence, the only sounds a horse's breathing and the wind moving through pine trees heavy with snow. The widow's body slowly stopped shaking, but the cowboy could still feel the tremors running through her every few minutes. Like aftershocks. Like her body couldn't quite believe it was still alive. His cabin appeared through the trees, small and rough but solid, smoke rising from the chimney he'd banked before riding out that morning. He'd been living up here for 2 years, running a small herd of cattle through the high valleys, avoiding towns and the questions that came with them. It was a lonely life, but lonely was safer than the alternative. He helped her down from the horse and guided her inside, one hand on her elbow like she might blow away if he let go. The cabin was warm, at least. The fire had held. He settled her into the chair closest to the hearth and went to work building up the flames. Only then did she finally open her hand. The locket gleamed gold in the firelight. Small, delicate, the kind of thing a man gives a woman when he's promising forever. The cowboy had seen plenty of them before, tucked into the pockets of dead soldiers, clutched in the hands of dying outlaws who wanted one last look at what they'd lost. But this one made him stop, made him stare. Because even closed, even from across the cabin, something about it felt familiar in a way that made his blood run cold. He told himself he was imagining it. Told himself there were 1,000 lockets, just like it scattered across the West, each one holding 1,000 different faces. But his hands had started shaking again. And when the widow looked up at him with those empty blue eyes, he wondered if saving her life had been the biggest mistake he'd ever made. She didn't cry. That's what struck him first. Sitting across from her in the cabin's dim warmth, watching her stare into the fire like it held answers she'd stopped asking for. Her dress had started to dry, leaving dark water marks across the black fabric. Her hair hung loose now, falling in damp waves around shoulders that seemed too small to carry the weight she bore. The widow just sat there, silent, still, the locket resting in her palm like a wounded bird. The cowboy filled the kettle and hung it over the fire, his hands steadier now, but still trembling at the edges. He'd faced down rustlers and outlaws, had stood his ground in more fights than he cared to count, but something about the quiet in this cabin pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow began to fall again, softer this time, gentler, like the mountain was apologizing for what it had tried to do. He found 2 tin cups in the cupboard and set them on. The rough-hewn table between them. The sound seemed too loud in the silence. The widow didn't look up. Her thumb traced circles on the locket surface, over and over, like a prayer she'd memorized in her bones. "Coffee'll be ready soon," he said, just to break the quiet. She nodded, but didn't speak. The cowboy had lived alone long enough to know the difference between comfortable silence and the kind that cuts. This was the cutting kind. The kind that fills with all the words people don't say because saying them would make them real. He'd carried that silence himself for 3 years. Knew its weight. Knew how it could suffocate a man if he let it. He checked the fire, added another log, watched the sparks climb toward the ceiling like tiny prayers that would never be answered. The cabin wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof he'd patched himself, but it had kept him alive through 2 hard winters. It was enough. More than he deserved, probably. When the coffee was ready, he poured it carefully, filling both cups to the brim. The steam rose between them, carrying the bitter smell that had become his only comfort in the long months of isolation. He pushed 1 cup toward her across the table. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." The widow wrapped both hands around the cup, but didn't drink. Just held it like she needed something warm to anchor her to the world. Her eyes stayed fixed on the locket, which she'd set beside the cup. The firelight caught its gold surface, making it gleam like a small sun in the darkness. "Thank you," she said finally. Her voice came out rough, like she'd forgotten how to use it. "It's just coffee." "Not for the coffee." The cowboy settled into the chair across from her, his own cup warming his palms. He knew what she meant. For pulling her from the avalanche. For bringing her here. For not leaving her to die on that mountain like some part of her had wanted. Anyone would have done the same, he said. No. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were clearer than before. Still sad. God, so sad, but focused. Most men would have kept writing. Pretended they didn't see. He couldn't argue with that. He'd seen enough of the world to know she was right. The frontier made people hard. Made them turn away from suffering, because acknowledging it meant you might have to do something about it. Easier to keep writing. Safer. But he'd stopped anyway. "What were you doing up there?" he asked. "On the mountain. In this weather." The widow's fingers found the locket again. Visiting. Dangerous time for visiting. "I go every week." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like risking her life on an unstable mountain in the middle of winter was just part of her routine. Since they buried him. 3 years now. The cowboy felt something cold slide down his spine. 3 years. The same amount of time he'd been running. The same amount of time since that night in the saloon when everything went wrong. "Your husband," he said. Not a question. "Sheriff Thomas Miller." She said the name like it hurt. Like speaking it out loud took something from her she couldn't afford to lose. He was a good man. Everyone said so. The cup nearly slipped from the cowboy's hand. Sheriff Thomas Miller. The name hit him like a fist to the gut, knocking the air from his lungs. He knew that name. Knew it the way you know the names of people you've killed. Carved into your memory like initials in a tree, permanent and damning. But he kept his face still. Kept his breathing steady. He'd learned that trick a long time ago. How to lie with your whole body. How to make people believe whatever you needed them to believe. "I'm sorry for your loss," he managed. The widow nodded, her eyes distant again. They said it was a drifter who shot him. An outlaw passing through town who got drunk and violent in the saloon. Tom tried to settle him down. Tried to talk him out the door peaceful. But the man drew on him. The cowboy's hands were shaking again. He set the cup down before she could notice. "They never caught him," she continued, her voice flat as the winter plains. "The outlaw ran, disappeared into the territories like smoke. The deputy formed a posse, but they lost the trail in the Badlands. Some men just vanish, I guess. Just gone like they were never there at all. But he hadn't vanished. He'd just changed. Shaved his beard, let his hair grow long, moved to the high country where no one asked questions and bounty hunters didn't bother to look. He'd become someone else. Someone quieter. Someone who saved widows from avalanches instead of making them. Must be hard," he said carefully, "not knowing what happened to him. The man who did it." She picked up the locket, holding it to the firelight. For a moment he thought she was going to open it, and his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. But she just held it closed, her thumb tracing that same endless circle. "Sometimes I dream about finding him," she said softly. "The outlaw. In my dreams I have Tom's gun, and I make him look at me before I pull the trigger. Make him see what he took. Make him understand. And then I wake up." She finally took a sip of coffee, her hands steady as stone. "And he's still out there somewhere. Still breathing. Still living while Tom's buried under 6 feet of frozen ground." The silence came back, heavier than before. The cowboy wanted to speak, wanted to say something, anything, that might ease the moment. But what could he say? That he was sorry? That it had been an accident? That the sheriff had drawn first, and he'd just been faster? None of it would matter. None of it would bring her husband back, or ease the weight she carried. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly, looking straight at him. The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Simple. Direct. The kind of question you can't avoid without making it obvious you're avoiding it. "Cole," he lied. "Cole Brennan." His real name was carved on wanted posters in 3 territories. But Cole Brennan was clean. Cole Brennan was a rancher, a drifter, a man with no past worth mentioning. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Sarah Miller." The name settled on him like ash. They sat in the silence after that, 2 strangers bound together by snow and circumstance, and secrets neither could afford to tell. The fire crackled between them. The wind howled outside, and the locket sat on the table, catching the light, holding inside it a truth that would destroy them both if it ever came to air. The cowboy, the outlaw, the man who'd killed Sheriff Thomas Miller in a saloon 3 winters ago, poured more coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And across from him, the widow who dreamed of revenge finally closed her eyes and let herself breathe. The locket fell. That's how it happened, not with words or confessions, but with a simple slip of cold fingers at dawn. Sarah had been holding it while she stood at the doorway, watching the first light touch the mountain, and when she turned to look at him, the chain caught on her sleeve. The locket tumbled from her hand, hit the wooden floor, and sprang open like a mouth releasing a secret it had held too long. The cowboy saw the face before she could stop him. Young, clean-shaven, smiling in that way men smile when they believe the world still has more good than bad in it. The photograph was old, the edges worn soft from years of handling, but the image was clear enough. A sheriff's badge gleamed on the man's chest. His eyes, even in the faded brown tones of the photograph, carried a kindness that made the cowboy's stomach turn. Sheriff Thomas Miller, the man he'd killed. Sarah dropped to her knees, reaching for the locket with a small sound that might have been a gasp or might have been a prayer. But the cowboy had already seen, already knew. The floor between them felt like a canyon 1,000 miles wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing the locket with trembling fingers. "I didn't mean for you to, don't." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Don't apologize." She looked up at him, from the floor, still clutching the locket to her chest, and something in her expression broke him clean in half. She thought she'd done something wrong, thought she'd burdened him with her grief when he'd already done so much. If she only knew. The dawn light streaming through the cabin door painted everything gold and soft, the kind of light that made the world look gentle even when it wasn't. Sarah's face caught that light, and for the first time since he'd pulled her from the Avalanche, he saw her clearly. Really saw her. Not just as the widow, not just as the woman he'd saved, but as Sarah, a person, someone who'd loved and lost and kept going anyway because there was nothing else to do. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30, maybe less. The grief had aged her, carved lines around her eyes that shouldn't have been there yet. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, dark as coffee, catching threads of gold from the morning sun. She had small hands, work-worn hands, the hands of a woman who'd learned to do everything herself because there was no one left to help her. "He was 26 when they took this," she said quietly, still looking down at the closed locket. "Just made sheriff. So proud of that badge, he wore it everywhere, even to bed sometimes." She almost smiled. Almost. "I used to tease him about it, tell him the badge couldn't protect him from everything." The cowboy's throat had gone tight. He wanted to walk away, wanted to saddle his horse and ride so far into the territories that no one would ever find him. But his legs wouldn't move. His body had turned to stone. He believed in the law, Sarah continued, her voice soft as snow falling. Believed people were mostly good, that even the worst outlaw could be talked down if you just gave them a chance to do the right thing. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. That's what got him killed. His faith in people. The words hit like bullets. The cowboy remembered that night. Remembered it in the way you remember nightmares, fragments, and feelings more than clear images. The saloon had been dark and crowded. He'd been drinking for 2 days straight, trying to forget a failed cattle drive that had cost him everything. The sheriff had approached him, young Ernest, that damned badge catching the lamplight, and asked him to leave peacefully. But the cowboy had been drunk and angry and tired of losing. When the sheriff put a hand on his shoulder, he'd spun around with his gun already drawn. He didn't remember deciding to draw, didn't remember thinking at all. Just muscle memory and alcohol and rage moving through him like a separate animal. The sheriff had reached for his own gun, a second too slow, a heartbeat too hesitant, and the cowboy had fired. One shot. That's all it took. The young sheriff had gone down in the sawdust, blood spreading across his shirt while that badge gleamed above his heart. The cowboy had run, out the back door, onto his horse, into the darkness that swallowed men whole and didn't ask questions. He'd been running ever since. "I should make you breakfast," Sarah said, pulling him back to the present. She stood slowly, carefully, like her body hurt. "It's the least I can do. After everything. You don't owe me anything. You saved my life. Maybe you didn't want saving." The words came out before he could stop them. Sarah went still, the locket pressed against her heart, and for a long moment she just looked at him. Really looked. Like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. "No," she said finally. "I didn't. But you saved me anyway." She moved past him toward the small stove in the corner, her dress whispering against the floor. The cowboy stayed frozen in place, watching her move through his cabin like a ghost who decided to stay a while. She found his coffee tin, his skillet, the eggs he'd bought in town 2 weeks ago. Her hands worked with quiet efficiency, like cooking was something her body knew how to do even when her mind was somewhere else. He should tell her. The thought came, clear and sharp as broken glass. He should tell her the truth right now. Should say the words that would destroy whatever fragile thing had formed between them in the night. Should give her the justice she'd dreamed about, the closure she deserved. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. "The storm's passed," he said. "I can take you back to town this morning, if you want." Sarah cracked eggs into the skillet, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. "What town?" "Wherever you came from." "Silver Ridge." She said the name like it tasted bitter. 10 miles south. That's where we lived. Where I still live, I guess. In the house we bought together. The one he was going to fill with children. The eggs sizzled in the pan. The smell filled the cabin, normal, domestic, the scent of a life the cowboy had given up the right to years ago. "You don't have to go back," he said. "Not yet. The trail will be dangerous after the avalanche. You should rest. Wait a day or two." He didn't know why he said it. Didn't know why he wanted her to stay, when every moment she spent here was another moment he had to carry the weight of his lie. But the cabin had been empty for so long. And something about her presence, her grief that matched his own, her quiet strength that asked for nothing, made the space feel less like a prison. Sarah plated the eggs and brought them to the table. She set one plate in front of him and kept the other for herself. They ate in silence, the morning light growing stronger, the cabin warming as the sun climbed higher. When they finished, she carried the plates to the basin and washed them carefully. Her back was to him, her shoulders straight despite everything. The locket hung around her neck again, resting just above her heart, hiding its secrets, holding its dead. "Cole," she said without turning around. The false name made him flinch. "Yeah. Why do you live up here? Alone. So far from everything." The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. He'd come to the high country to hide, to disappear, to become someone new, because the old version of himself was wanted in 3 territories for murder. Needed the quiet, he said. Quiet from what? From myself. Sarah turned then, leaning against the basin, her blue eyes studying his face like she could read the truth written there if she just looked hard enough. And maybe she could. Maybe grief had given her that gift, the ability to see through lies, to spot broken men who carried their sins like stones in their pockets. "I know that feeling," she said softly. They stood there in the golden morning light, 2 people carrying secrets too heavy to name, and the cowboy felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something like hope, or maybe just the memory of what hope used to feel like. Sarah crossed the cabin slowly and stopped in front of him, close enough that he could count the faint freckles on her nose, close enough that he could see the exact shade of blue her eyes held, like winter sky just before snow. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me die on that mountain." She reached out, her hand finding his, and her palm was warm against his rough skin. She didn't let go. just held on like she needed something solid to anchor her to the world. And the cowboy, the outlaw, the killer, the man who destroyed her life 3 years ago, held on too. Because kindness was more dangerous than any bullet he'd ever faced. And this moment right here would haunt him for the rest of his days. I know who you are. 4 words. That's all it took to stop his heart. The cowboy froze with her hand still in his, every muscle in his body going rigid as stone. Sarah's blue eyes held his, calm, clear, carrying a truth that should have been impossible. The morning light painted gold across her face, and she looked at him the way you look at something you finally found after searching in the dark for too long. He tried to pull away, tried to speak, tried to do anything but stand there like a man facing the gallows. But before he could move, she lifted her other hand and pressed 2 fingers gently against his lips. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say anything yet." His mind raced, scrambling for explanations, for denials, for any words that might undo what she just said. But her touch kept him silent, kept him still. And in her eyes he saw something that terrified him more than anger or hatred ever could. Understanding. "I've known since last night," she said softly, her fingers still against his mouth. "Since you told me your name. Cole Brennan." She said the false name like it hurt. "But that's not who you really are, is it?" The cowboy's throat had closed. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The cabin walls felt like they were closing in, the morning light suddenly too bright, too exposing. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to grab his gun and his horse, and disappear into the territories before she could call for help. But Sarah's hand was still in his, and she hadn't let go. "The way you held the coffee cup," she continued, her voice quiet as snow falling. "Your left hand. Tom's deputy told me the outlaw who shot him was left-handed. They found the shell casing on the left side of where he'd been standing in the saloon. The detail hit him like a punch. Such a small thing. Such a simple, damning thing. And your eyes," Sarah said. "When I mentioned the saloon, when I talked about that night, you looked like a man seeing his own ghost." She lowered her fingers from his lips, but didn't step back. Didn't put distance between them. Instead she moved closer, so close he could see the faint lines grief had carved around her eyes, could count every freckle on her pale skin. "I should hate you," she whispered. "I've dreamed about hating you, about finding you and making you pay for what you took from me. I've carried that hatred for 3 years like it was the only thing keeping me alive." The cowboy finally found his voice. "Sarah, but I can't." The words came out broken, like they cost her something precious to say. "God help me, I can't hate you. Not after you saved me. Not after sitting across from you in the dark and seeing your pain. You've been carrying it too, haven't you? The weight of what you did." He wanted to deny it, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she'd mistaken him for someone else. But the lies wouldn't come. Not to her. Not now. "Every day," he said hoarsely. "Every single day since it happened." Sarah's hand tightened around his. "Tell me what happened. The truth. I need to hear it from you." So he told her. The words came slowly at first, like pulling stones from deep water. He told her about the failed cattle drive that had cost him everything he'd saved for 5 years. About the drinking that followed, the darkness that had settled over him like a shroud. About stumbling into that saloon in Silver Ridge, so drunk he could barely stand, looking for a fight or oblivion, or maybe both. "Your husband," he said, and the words tasted like ash. "Sheriff Miller. He came over to where I was sitting, tried to talk to me, asked me to leave peacefully before I caused trouble." Sarah's face had gone very still, but she didn't interrupt. Just listened with those blue eyes fixed on his face like she could see straight through to his soul. "I was so angry," the cowboy continued, his voice cracking, "so tired of losing. And when he put his hand on my shoulder, just trying to guide me toward the door, something in me snapped. I spun around, drew my gun before I even knew what I was doing." He could see it all again. The dim saloon light, the sawdust floor, the young sheriff's face, surprised but not afraid, reaching for his own gun, but too slow, too hesitant, probably hoping until the last second that he could talk the drunk drifter down without violence. He drew on me, the cowboy said. But I was faster. I was always faster. One shot. That's all it took. The cabin was silent except for their breathing. Outside, a bird called from the pine trees, the sound sharp and clear in the cold morning air. I watched him fall, the cowboy whispered. Watched the light go out of his eyes. And then I ran. Like the coward I was. Like the coward I still am. Sarah's hand trembled in his, but she didn't pull away. A single tear tracked down her cheek, catching the morning light. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. He wrote me a letter that morning, before he went to work. Left it on the kitchen table. She paused, swallowing hard. He said he loved me, that he wanted to start a family, that he felt like the luckiest man alive. The words carved into the cowboy's chest like a knife. He wanted to fall to his knees. Wanted to beg for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Wanted to tell her to call for the marshal, to turn him in, to give her the justice that had haunted her dreams. But Sarah stepped closer instead. I found that letter when they brought his body home, she said. Read it over and over until I had it memorized. And every time I read it, I hated you more. The nameless outlaw who'd stolen my future, who'd killed a good man for no reason at all. Sarah, but you're not nameless anymore. She lifted her free hand to his face, her palm cool against his rough cheek. You're not faceless. You're not the monster I built in my mind. You're just a man. A broken man who made a terrible mistake and has been dying from it ever since. The cowboy's eyes burned. I killed him. I killed your husband. I know. I destroyed your life. I know. You should hate me. I know. Sarah's thumb traced along his jawline, gentle as a prayer. But hate is so heavy, and I'm so tired of carrying it. She was crying now, tears falling freely down her face, but she didn't look away, didn't hide from him, just stood there in the morning light with all her pain and grief laid bare between them like an offering. The man who pulled me from that avalanche, she said softly. The man who carried me down the mountain and kept me warm and made me coffee in the dark. The man who's been living alone in the wilderness, hiding from his past, suffering in silence. That man saved my life. That doesn't erase what I did. No. She shook her head slowly. Nothing can erase it. Nothing can bring Tom back, or give me the life we should have had. But it means something. It has to mean something. The cowboy didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to respond to forgiveness he hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. He'd spent 3 years running from what he'd done, certain that if the law didn't catch him, his guilt would kill him eventually. But here stood the one person in the world with the right to condemn him, and instead of hatred he saw something else in her eyes. Mercy. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking on the words. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know you are. She stepped even closer, until there was no space left between them. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. You've been living in your own prison all this time. Her hand was still on his face, her other hand still holding his. The cabin around them felt suspended in time, like the whole world had stopped to watch what happened next. Tell me your real name, Sarah whispered. He hesitated. The name was dangerous. The name was wanted. The name carried a price on its head and death in its shadow. But she'd given him honesty, and he owed her the same. James, he said quietly. James Garrett. Sarah nodded slowly, like the name fit something she'd been trying to solve. James Garrett. The outlaw. The killer. The man who murdered my husband. Each word should have been a condemnation. Each word should have pushed them apart. Instead, Sarah rose up on her toes, her face tilting toward his, her eyes searching his one last time like she was looking for permission, or maybe just courage. And the man who saved me, she whispered. Then she kissed him, soft at first, gentle, like she was afraid he might shatter. Her lips were warm against his, tasting of salt and coffee and something deeper, something like forgiveness or maybe just a possibility of it. The cowboy James stood frozen for a heartbeat, his mind unable to process what was happening. But then his body remembered how to move, and he kissed her back, It wasn't passion. It wasn't desire. It was something older and more necessary than that. It was two broken people finding each other in the wreckage of their lives and deciding, just for this moment, that they didn't have to carry their pain alone. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his chest. The locket pressed between them, hard and cold, a reminder of everything they'd lost and everything they could never get back. "I don't know what this means," she said into his shirt. "I don't know if I can ever really forgive you. Or if I'm betraying Tom's memory. Or if I'm just so broken that I can't tell right from wrong anymore." James wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she might disappear if he held too tight. "I don't know either. But I know I don't want you to run." She looked up at him, her eyes red but clear. "Don't leave. Not yet. Stay with me. Help me figure out what comes next." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning frost. The mountain stood silent in the distance, keeping its secrets. And inside the cabin, two souls, who should have been enemies, held each other in the light, and chose something other than hate. It wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't bring back the dead or erase the past. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start with.